question about water being a local issue. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking was this idea of wanting water that tastes good, and also behavior of when do people tend to buy bottled water more? And I was wondering, I haven't read your book yet, but I'm curious too, if you know anything about people tending to buy bottled water when they're traveling, and if the label of bottled water and bottled water in general is kind of like sort of any kind of corporate industry that we're going to be used to. I mean, I guess fast food would be a good example, where we're going to there's going to be people that are going to tend to want to choose their favorite fast food chain because they know they can go to this chain wherever they are and they're going to get the same thing. So I guess my question is just... Yeah,
it's a great question. Consistency of taste is important. This water tastes really good, by the way. First of all, it turns out we really like the taste of the water wherever we grew up. I don't know whether we're imprinted at a young age with water, but we like the taste of the water where we grew up. It's also true that 100 years ago, when the bottled water industry really was limited to mineral waters, mostly in Europe, people had their favorite mineral waters. Mineral waters have incredibly diverse concentrations of minerals, depending on where the spring is. Some of them are really rich in one mineral and poor in another mineral, and those minerals determine the taste. So people develop favorite mineral waters, and Perrier was one, but there are thousands of mineral waters in Europe with very specific tastes, and people like their particular brands. In the United States, it's a little different now. The vast majority of bottled waters are bottled to be, tasteless is the wrong word because every water has a taste, but not, I'm not even sure what the right word is. Bland is sort of what comes to mind, but consistent. So I think I said this, but the Dasani that's bottled in Seattle tastes the same as the Dasani that's bottled in Detroit, even though in Detroit it comes from the Detroit municipal system, and out here, if there's a bottling plant in Seattle, it comes from the local water system, and in San Francisco it comes from the San Leandro bottling plant. I've been there. They take all of the minerals out, and then they actually add back precisely calculated, they call it pixie dust, magic minerals, so that every bottled water of Dasani tastes the same no matter where it comes from. They think they want, and it's probably true, customers want a consistency of taste. So yeah, there's some of that. I think we develop our preferences, and if you're going to drink bottled water and you have a particular favorite, go ahead, but it wouldn't kill you to drink tap water.
I don't drink bottled water, but we were talking briefly before you started talking about how I was saying that our water was pretty chlorinated out in I come from Snohomish County, and you were saying that we could just put it in the refrigerator and it would evaporate. Mm-hmm. So my question to you, a couple questions. Number one, what levels of chlorine aren't good for you that are in our water? Because we also shower, and that's the biggest organ of our body, and the chlorine's going to get through us. And then number two, it's my understanding that they neutralize, that the water that we drink has to have a neutral pH. And I'm just wondering how they're able to get that, what chemical they use to put that as a neutral, so that it's not acidic or too alkaline. And then number three, I have family in Arizona, and you cannot drink their tap water. It is despicable. I mean, even with, my brother has a filtering system, not like you put on the tap, but through the pipes. And even with that, you cannot drink their water down there. So what would you do then?
Where does their water come from? Is it a municipal system or a local well? Or?
Municipal.
Okay. So chlorine. Chlorine kills bugs. We put it in water because the water that we put in the top of the pipe at the purification plant is pure. It's treated, it's purified, it's clean water. And then there are the pipes. We want the water that comes out the taps to be as safe to drink as the water that goes in the top. where they test it more regularly. And chlorine is great because it leaves a residual in the water, and as it travels through the pipes, it keeps the water pure. Chlorine will evaporate out of water. If you put a pitcher in your refrigerator overnight, the chlorine will be gone by the morning, typically. But the low levels of chlorine that are in most municipal water mostly are harmless. Now, there are exceptions. Sometimes chlorine interacts with other things to produce what are called trihalomethanes, which are not good for you. And water systems work pretty hard to make sure that the level of trihalomethanes is pretty low. A lot of systems are moving away from free chlorine to chloramines, which don't produce trihalomethanes the way free chlorine did. And they're moving toward other kinds of systems that are designed to make sure your water remains clean. pH, I don't know the answer to that. Most pH doesn't have to be adjusted because most natural waters are within a range of pH that water systems are allowed to deliver. If you have really alkaline water or acidic water, I guess they would have to adjust the pH. I'm not sure how they would do that, but in either way, the water they produce has to meet federal standards, and there are a lot of federal standards for hundreds of things in our water. There are places where our tap water system is not as good as it should be. Your relatives, your friends in Arizona, it's bad. I'm sure it's bad. I've been places where I don't like the taste of the water. Even there, it probably meets federal standards. Now that's a question of taste. It's a combination of minerals that might be bad. Typically when water tastes really bad, it's often salty. It has high, what we call total dissolved solids. There are systems that take out, filter systems at the home level that can take out bad tasting water, can take out chlorine, can take out total dissolved solids. I don't typically recommend home filter systems except when we know that there are things in the water that you don't like or when you really don't like the taste of the water. And then you have to be careful. You have to make sure that the filter system you buy is taking out things that are really in your water. Sometimes they don't, and sometimes they don't take out things that are in your water that you want to take out. And sometimes they're just not doing anything at all. So if you want a home filter system, make sure you know what you're getting, and then make sure that puts you on a treadmill to buy new systems all the time. You have to make sure you're replacing the filters when you're supposed to, or they can worsen the quality of your water. The bottom line, though, is if you have a municipal system that produces terrible tasting tap water, they ought to fix the system. They ought to produce a better tasting water. In the end, the answer isn't bottled water. The answer is fix our tap water system.
But they don't.
They should.
And they don't.
Yeah, well, that's a problem. We underinvest. It's true. We underinvest in our tap water system. We underinvest in a lot of our infrastructure. But we ought to pay what's necessary to provide the high quality water we want.
Hi, I was wondering if you were familiar with the movie Flow. I'm assuming that you've seen it.
I'm in it.
You're in it. Okay. Well, I thought you were familiar. Okay. So I've seen that movie, and that was part of what got me so interested in in the issue of bottled water. I'm kind of along with this woman's question just about how the corporations get away with really stealing the public water, and if there were not if in this country it would be difficult to go so far as nationalize the water supply, which I think would be a great idea, and then we would have to invest more in infrastructure, but just some way to make the water companies responsible for the actual cost, just like the oil companies, like the energy, we don't look at the actual cost. If there's some way to make them more liable for the actual cost of the water that they're taking.
Yeah, great question. I wouldn't go so far as to say they steal the water, in the sense that they go in and take it without permission. It's a steal in the economic sense, that they rarely pay very much for the water, and they never pay the true full costs of taking that water and using it. The answer is not to nationalize it. The answer is for local communities to manage water in a sustainable way. And that means understanding who's using water, charging properly for it, making sure that that use is sustainable, dealing with the environmental consequences of using water from our systems. This is a problem for bottled water, it's a problem for municipal water systems, it's a problem for agricultural water use in this country. We're running up against limits of our water system. We're running up against what we call at the Institute peak water limits. And all water uses ought to be far more sustainable than they are. We ought to pay the full economic, social, cultural, and environmental costs of our water use. I don't think bottled water companies should be able to go in and bottle water without paying a substantial amount for that water. They're turning it into a huge profit margin, and yet the communities from which that water flows rarely see the economic benefits of letting those companies in. You know, the companies argue, let us build a big bottled water plant here, we'll bring jobs. Often these are rural communities because the water quality is best there. Those jobs are desperately needed, but it comes at an environmental cost, and I think we ought to do a better job of balancing the pros and the cons of these big bottled water plants. Now, the good news is more and more communities are beginning to fight against them. There have been proposals in California, in Maine, and Michigan, and Colorado to build big bottled water plants, and the local communities are beginning to say, look, not in my backyard. We have other uses for this water. Dennis.
Peter, I shouldn't do this late, but a couple of things that are a little bit off message, but just occurred to me as I was sitting here. When you have a commodity, regardless of what it is, that's essentially fungible, particularly if there's some kind of a limit in the market, ordinarily people start competing for market share. And you do that by driving the price down further and further. You put up this graph with all of those different water companies. They've got enormous profit margins. They're getting something that costs essentially zero and selling it for 1,000 times more. Why isn't there price competition? Any idea?